Welcome to HogvilleNET YouTube Live, everybody. I'm Kevin McPherson. Good morning. Thanks to all who are here and will join us later in the day as we progress. It's one of those early Tuesdays. I sometimes jump on here really early, and so we've done that again, 5:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. As we're at the midway point effectively in July, you think, why are we talking basketball? It's something important every day. In fact, later today, I'll be attending a speaking engagement of John Calipari here in the 501, and that's a few hours from now. So that'll be interesting to say the least. But we've got plenty of other things to talk about. Yesterday, we had planned on jumping in here and talking a little bit about Arkansas's front line, doing more of a deep dive than we were able to do. We kind of gave the general overviews from that open practice roughly a week ago. I guess it was last Wednesday. We got access inside the Basketball Performance Center in Fayetteville, got to watch the team practice for an hour, had a post-practice press conference for players, Calipari. So we dove into a lot of that and kind of been in more generalities. We did go through each individual player, but I kind of want to look at position groups moving ahead. And it's what we saw from practice, and then extrapolating that with other things we were being told that was happening inside the performance center by other sources leading up to that. So it's not just that 1 hour glimpse. It's not a lot, but it's more than just that. And and until we see more coming out of the building in there in terms of highlights, videos, the media, we were told we'll probably get another opportunity to go back in September when the team comes back from a brief summer break, and gets ramped up in the fall semester with practices and that sort of thing. So for now, we just talk about what we think's going on and how we see things. So we'll get into the front line. We're going to hit just a couple of recruiting tidbits this morning, a little intel for you as Arkansas gets closer now to actually hosting visits. We've heard in generalities visitors lining up, stops in Fayetteville. Some of these higher level five-star guys, we know Arkansas for class of 2026 has already got the first commitment, got its first commitment from J.J. Andrews, Jashawn J.J. Andrews, the 6'7" wing out of Little Rock Christian Academy, who's just had a wonderful spring. That's turning into a really, really good summer on the when you look at grassroots basketball, the various camps, MBPA Top 100 camp. And so, he continues to prove why he's a five-star, always has been, but 12th rated by ESPN. He is the highest committed player in the country. So there are no player ranked higher than him that's committed anywhere at this point. So that's the second consecutive year where Calipari's pulled that off. It was late July when he picked up the first commitment last year from Darius Acuff Jr., and he was the first top 10 rated five-star in the country to come off the board for a commitment. So Arkansas is off to the great start. We know that. We're just kind of recovering that territory because now, for months, weeks, months, we've been talking about certain players that Arkansas has targeted and referring to, well, they intend to visit Arkansas. Tyron Stokes, the number one player in that class, 6'7" wing, originally from Louisville, West Coast guy now in terms of where he plays, has said he intends to visit Arkansas. He's already taken, three other visits. And so Arkansas, very likely may be in a final 4 or 5 for him when the dust settles. But we don't know that because we don't have a scheduled date yet for him to visit Arkansas. At some point, you expect that to happen. But for now, it's still a bit vague in terms of when. And, things can change in recruiting as Arkansas peel off. At any point, this just never happens. The other one is Jordan Smith Jr., the third ranked player in that class, 6'2" guard out of Virginia, Fairfax, Virginia. We've talked just about daily about him for weeks now. Explosive, elite arm length, strong, physical, fierce competitor. When you look at Stokes, probably the most versatile positionally in high school basketball. So you understand why these guys are ranked first and third. Well, Jordan Smith Jr. has indicated that he wants to visit Arkansas as well, and that he plans to do that and set that up after Nike Peach Jam, which is the creme de la creme, the capper to the Nike EYBL season. And that's going to play out later this week through the weekend. You have a second consecutive live evaluation period for coaches, and Nike Peach Jam is where Arkansas's coaches will spend most of their time. They'll fan out, but I expect to see a lot of John Calipari in North Augusta, South Carolina, and as well as other staffers through the end of this week. And it's another 4-day live period. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of this week, just the same as it was last week. All right, so those are the two big names that we've talked a lot about, and two that say they intend to visit Arkansas. But we've got more clarity about some other players that intend to visit. Tay Kenny, it just came out, the 6'1", 6'2" point guard, native of Kentucky, plays at Overtime Elite. And he recently went on the record stating he intends to visit Arkansas on a specific date. It's the weekend of September 26th through the 28th. It's the only weekend in the month of September that the football Hogs host a home game in Fayetteville. And so the Hogs are playing Notre Dame that weekend. So we've already talked about this. Kenny went public with this information. He told me back in May when I covered him live in person, and live in Texas at the Adidas 3SSB event then, that he intended, when I interviewed him, he intended to set up a visit with Arkansas soon. Well, soon turned out to be a couple of months later. He set up the visit. And again, we're looking at earmark the last weekend of September. And you've got a football game. He'll attend basketball practice, go to that game. You know the drill. So that one's set up. Another one that we've talked about. Now, look, Kenny is a guy, I've mentioned this before we move on to the main part of the intel, is a guy, Kenny, that this coaching staff was recruiting. I mentioned he's a Kentucky native. Recruiting him before they were ever at Arkansas. They've been recruiting him since they were still on the staff for the Wildcats. And so that's well over a year. That pursuit's been in place. On top of that, being an Overtime Elite player, we know that's in Calipari's wheelhouse. Jordan Burks, maybe the last player that he recruited to Kentucky at Overtime Elite that he got and played as a freshman 2 seasons ago. Then last season, Carter Knox, Arkansas's freshman on the first Razorbacks roster, who came out of that program. Malik Thomas, who will suit up this year, top 10 rated 5-star freshman guard. We know that. Also an Overtime Elite player. So it's not to say that a trend won't be broken at some point, but there's kind of a pattern there. And there's this relationship building that's been going on for a while, going back to Kentucky. And I mentioned this recently. Kenny is the first player in the class of 2026 that I remember the Calipari offered once he took the Arkansas job. So that might have been, and I think it was, the first player he offered in that class before J.J. Andrews, before several others. And so I think you start piecing that together. You understand that the staff is not ho-hum about this recruitment. They're serious about it. And then when get them scheduled for a visit, you know that both parties are serious and where can this go? A lot of momentum for Arkansas right now. We mentioned recently that Kenny may be a lean to Louisville, home state school. It's an Adidas school. He plays on the Adidas circuit. Calipari was out to see him last Thursday in the first July live eval period in Rock Hill, South Carolina. So this thing is just progressing. And so Kenny is a very talented lead guard. He's a guy who can score, whether transition, creating a shot. He can knock down threes. More than a capable facilitator, a really good one. When I watched him play in May, he was focused more on the facilitating part, but he's certainly not bashful about going out and getting buckets. Good athleticism and a tough defender. He's a gritty kid. I really like Tay Kenny. So, you look at this, he's a top 20 rated 5-star guard. I think ESPN has him ranked 17th. All right, so we've kind of covered all this before. I think today, just dropping that again, just because we're specifically now kind of looking at, now we're starting to see some visit dates actually come out. And the idea now that Arkansas, to say that it's advantage Calipari because he's going to get him on campus, probably not quite ready to say, well, this guy's leaning Arkansas. But I always think it's advantage Arkansas when Calipari gets him on campus. So I think Arkansas is right there and can pluck this and win this recruiting battle. I don't think it's one of those where the staff's on the outside kind of looking in with a lot of ground to cover. NIL is one thing, but the relationship part and the proof of Calipari's track record have all been in a good favor for that staff because, again, they've been on him for a long time and immediately re-offered him when they got to Arkansas. So I look at all the little things. And then Arkansas's coaching staff, whether it's Calipari, assistant coach Chuck Martin, others, Kenny Payne, and Chin Coleman have been courtside to see him throughout each opportunity when there's live eval chances to do that. All right, nearly 10 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Let's jump to some new intel, something I referred to when I tweeted out that I'd be coming on this early in the morning. For those of you braving it this early, thank you for being here. So the new intel is this. We've talked a lot about 2026, 7'1", 280-pound center Arafan Dioun out of Iowa United Prep, also played for 17U Iowa United on the Adidas 3SSB circuit. We've been reporting on him for a while, the fact that Arkansas staff was really making him a priority. It goes back to Calipari last year going to his high school campus, Iowa United, to see him, and everything since then. They offered him a year ago, back in July of last year. We reported it at the time. But everything he's done, Arkansas's had a staff member courtside for since, including Calipari on Thursday again when he was at Adidas 3SSB in Rock Hill, South Carolina. So we'd already told you that the young man had mentioned to me back in May that he plans to visit Arkansas in September. And then I spoke with his guardian who said, well, we're going to set up 5 to 7 official visits for September, some in October. And Arkansas, is in great shape to get one of those. And so that's been the intel of this point in terms of a visit and where this is going with Arkansas. I know Arkansas staff is head over heels about this player. Very skilled at 7'1". You think of the body. If you've seen photos of him, you've seen highlights of him, you see just how big he is. He is a mountain. And a lot of times you may be caught off guard a little bit when you see a big man like that with the skill level that he possesses. Can shoot the three a little bit, can put the ball on the deck and maneuver, can switch hands, and he's got a crossover. He's got a nice low post game, good footwork, backing players down, turning left or right over his shoulder. He's a good passer. I compared him initially to a guy like Joel Embiid, his guardian, and others that I've seen now that his recruitment has just blown up. Have compared him to the I guess referred to him as the African Joker. So Nikola Jokic. So those are pretty lofty comparisons and praise for a player that hasn't proven it on the level of those guys just yet. But I've really been touting him for a while, and when we were talking about him, he wasn't rated as highly as he has earned over the last several weeks. Big performances in MBPA Top 100 camp, as well as his opportunities on the circuit with Adidas 3SSB. But he's continued to garner a lot of high major and big basketball program offers, and has moved up in the recruiting rankings. 15th now, according to 247 Sports, the number one center in the country. 15th overall. ESPN has him ranked inside the top 25. So he's verging a 5-star if you don't consider top 15 already a 5-star. But the intel now is that I've caught you up on who it is. A lot of it again is repetitive over what we've said before, but just to get you up to speed on what's new, the new intel is, after speaking to his guardian again yesterday, he had just gotten off the phone with Kenny Payne, Arkansas associate head coach. So this was Monday, right after the 4-day live eval period. That's kind of when business picks back up, when you start to conduct discussions with coaching staffs about setting those visits, setting those up. And so that one is really close. That visit's really close to being finalized. So what we've gone from the Guardian saying that 5 to 7 visits, Arkansas is in great shape, where it's apparent now, and it's evident in this discussion yesterday, Arkansas is absolutely getting a visit. Now, the player said it weeks ago, a couple of months ago, we reported it, but until those things actually start to get set and kind of put in stone, that's another thing. And again, Arkansas has the one late September home date for football where you're trying to maximize that. That's when Tay Kenny's coming in. There's also a home date, oddly enough, the first actual football home date is late August. I think August 30th, Arkansas is hosting is at Alabama A&M, Alabama State in football. And so, keep an eye on multiple dates early. The two earliest then being that weekend, August 30th, and then late September. So, and so we should have a precise visit date for him in the coming days. Other than now, it's escalated from the Guardian saying Arkansas is in great shape, likely to get a visit, where they're actually planning that out now. That's happening. So it's happening for Arkansas. We expected that, but that's what intel is all about. We've seen a lot of visits that were expected, planned, telegraphed by people, and then over time things change. They're not on the same page anymore with the staff, or vice versa, and they just thought these things don't happen. So when you hear that it's progressed to the point where we're about to get the date set, that's a big deal, and it'll be one of the earlier fall dates because there's only two, and it's right now without it being finalized. It looks like it's going to be an either or with late August, late September. There'll be home dates in October. If again, sometimes these things get set, we learn about them publicly, and then they get changed anyway. It happens all the time. But for now, Arkansas is zeroing in on closing up that, zipping up that and finalizing that visit date for Arafan Dioun. I've spoken a lot about him, mainly not only because of how good he is, but I think that's it's poignant that we're going to talk front line today because he's a frontline guy, and Calipari has not locked up a frontline guy out of the high school ranks yet since he's been at Arkansas. That just hasn't happened yet. And so this is hopefully pointing in that direction if you're John Calipari and the Razorbacks coaching staff. Just yesterday when I came on, I went through a pecking order. I kind of prioritized players in terms of what the priorities are, should be, and what that looks like. And Arafan Dioun was in that top six. Arkansas has really been out and probably canvassed and really been courtside and made an effort with up to 16 players in the 2026 class. So, if you're only going to get four and you've already got one of those in JJ Andrews, then you're down to three. I think this has got to be one of those guys that you're earmarking and making a priority. There are other players as well, but this would be the first center and potentially the first frontline guy. There's other frontline guys Arkansas is recruiting in that class. So, getting him in for visits, a guy like Mika Murnin, who Arkansas we've reported on here recently, now is zeroed in on him solely as a class of 2026. Another top 15 rated frontline guy, 6'10", 6'11" combo forward out of Finland. He's already visited Arkansas. That was a year ago in September, right? Late September. So he's a guy that, if in a sense, just went, dropped his cut list of 7. Maybe he does another list to get it down to 3 or something. Maybe his takes a little more time. Maybe Arafan Dioun, visits other schools and that goes through the fall a little bit. So who can say if you're going to get both? If you were able to get both, I think you'd try to get both as part of that 4. I don't have a problem with that. Not at the expense of a guy like Jordan Smith Jr. or Tyron Stokes, for example. If you could get both of those and you're going to stay to 4 because that math doesn't work. But it's a reason why I have both Murnin and Dioun in my top 5 or 6. Means I see a pathway to get both of them, and I see validation in doing that. I think they're both worthy of that kind of pursuit, and then we'll see what the end result is. But that is the new intel on Arafan Dioun. Some of it's the fact that Arkansas is getting a visit. It's just now what date do they hammer out? So again, yeah, the player told me that, but that was back in May, and September's a long way away. Well, now we're getting mid-July, so September's a lot closer in the rearview mirror, or not in the rearview mirror, but up ahead. It's a lot closer, and if it's late August, that's even closer. That's next month. If it turns out to be technically that first home playing date for the Football Hogs, and remember, you're not glued to taking a visit during a football weekend. You could come in on another date. We saw that. Speaking of Mika Murnin last year, Murnin came in when the Football Hogs were playing, but they didn't have a home game. So his visit happened when there was no packed Reynolds Razorback Stadium, and it's a different atmosphere, right? When there's a home game and you've got a visitor in either football or basketball, and you've got a visitor on campus. All right, so moving on now, I think, again, things are trending in the right way for Arafan Dioun. When we talked about him and Tay Kenny just now, these are not situations where Arkansas is getting on these players late. I think that's the other key. NIL is going to be a huge part of it. So you can get in late. If you come to the dance late and you got the biggest bag, that may be an equalizer. But in this case, we know Arkansas has plenty of NIL. They're not going to go nuts with it. They never do. And Calipari even talks publicly about, he wants guys that want to be that. What did he say? Not jumping over nickels. They're, for a 1-year bag or whatever. Looking at long term, and so that's always going to be a thing and a theme for how they operate recruiting wise. But I think the key here is these are not fresh relationships. These are players, and I just went through some of the timelines of how the staff has really been on them for a while. Well over a year. And again, Calipari being on his high school campus at Iowa United Prep well over a year ago when nobody was talking as much about Arafan Dioun. He's kind of blown up, but Arkansas has been in there just like they were with Tay Kenny. All right, moving on. Let's talk about this Arkansas Razorbacks front line coming into the next season. The upcoming season, of course, we're several months away from that. But we talked about several of the things that stood out to us from practice the other day. One of them was Trevor Brazile, just how good he looked. And if, arguably, if you were basing it off of 1 hour of open practice, he's the best player on the team based on that performance at both ends of the court that day. Remember the source information I brought a few days prior to that, speaking with a coach who had been in the building for not one but two practices. And the first big man name that he brought up was Trevor Brazile. Remember, a couple of sources prior to that, in the early stages, the first name they mentioned amongst those frontline players was Nick Pringle. But finally, I had a source who'd been there 2 different days, and it was Trevor Brazile. And then what we saw when the media was in there for an hour, again, it was Trevor Brazile. And so you're starting off talking about a retained player who's been at Arkansas now going in year 4, second season under Calipari. Once upon a time, a former head coach at Arkansas referred to him as the top 5 player in the SEC. And he certainly looked like that in the down the stretch of the season last year. Final 9 games, over 11 points, 9 rebounds per outing, was shooting his high, fairly good volume from 3 and knocking it down at 39%. He's a career 36% shooter from 3. But what we saw from him at practice exceeded everything else we've ever seen with him. He's bigger. He said he added 10 pounds. It looks like all muscle. He's all about the business. And you can tell when a player, don't just listen to maybe a demeanor change, which he has. Kind of a stoic, quiet guy, more direct, more eye contact. There's a seriousness about it. We talked to him in the post-practice presser, but I'm not just listen to what he says. Show me, give me results. And, it's a practice, but for an hour, the guy was delivering, man. He was anticipating plays instead of being back on his heels and ball watching, which we've seen him, in between making wow plays here and there. A lot of indecisiveness, tentativeness, not willing to take on physicality, kind of shine away from things. The last 9 games of last year, again, he moved the needle in a great way with all of that. And now it's just continues to spiral in a good way. That snowball's getting bigger and bigger going downhill. It seems like things are coming easier for him, and he gets it and he's locked in. It starts with him. I think the biggest question mark we had is, well, who backs him up? That's, if we were looking at roster weaknesses, we've talked about it ad nauseum, lack of 3-point shooting on the perimeter, maybe, or from anywhere, and then a lack of depth at the 4 spot. And we've said for the longest time, if they don't add a viable backup piece, which they looked at many, even through the international stuff recently, and then they've opted not to go any sort of route. They haven't veered off to find somebody to do that. They're looking at developmental guys here at the end. They've already added 2, maybe 1 more coming. We've talked about all that. So where's that depth behind Trevor Brazile? And one thing I always talked about when they started adding some of these developmental bigs, I said, I'm real bashful and shy about even suggesting that one of those guys is going to plug in. Paulo Samito, probably the more likely, if you had to do that, over Elmir Javic. They're both, by the way, still on a path to be at Arkansas. They couldn't be in summer school. They didn't get there enrolled in time. You can't be on campus and going through formal practice stuff and even the conditioning stuff unless you're enrolled in school. That's why they get them in those summer session 1 and 2. Get most everybody as soon as they can, so they can be already take part of the on-court stuff that the NCAA allows. But you've got to be a student to do that. So they'll be here in time for the fall semester when everybody else starts main school, and then they'll be part of practices, obviously, leading up to the season. But having said that, there really isn't a path I didn't see for either one of those guys, who are both 7-footers, Samito being more versatile, maybe a 4-5. I still thought before he'd ever see the court, when Trevor Brazile's not playing the 4, he's either on the bench getting a blow, or he goes to the bench because he's got early foul trouble, or he's helping at the 5 because you're rotating and he's a 4-5, that we would likely see guys like Carter Knox play a small ball 4 before we'd ever see Samito. We would likely see times when Nick Pringle and Malik Ewan, who we projected both as the centers coming into this, playing on the court together, and we'll see how that looks. And I always said I felt like they'd be okay with that because of the skills that Ewan brings, some of the soft skills, some of the face-up skills, ball handling, passing, and it wouldn't be just two big bodies that are kind of awkward together and wouldn't complement each other. I could see a 4-5 arrangement with even those two. Not that that would be your preferred, because Brazil's going to be your starter at the 4 and play most of the minutes there, but you would be able to put those two together on the floor together and buy more time for Brazil to get a blow, or if he's dealing with foul trouble, or Ewan playing the 4 with Brazil at the 5. However, they dice that up based on matchup situations. But now, having heard Calipari say in that post practice press conference that he views Ewan as a 4-5, that says everything. They look at him as a guy that's going to give them minutes at the 4. So even though we talked about it before, Calipari has basically confirmed it. So they don't see that they have a shortage at the 4 spot. It's basically a committee of 2 after Brazil of Ewan and Carter Knox. And we had a minutes allocation for all 3 of these guys on the front line when we talked minutes. A couple of months ago, we started doing that, or 6 weeks ago, whatever. And I had a minutes allocation where I had Brazil and Ewan kind of in the mid-20s, 25 minutes a game. And I saw Pringle maybe at 20 minutes a game coming in as the backup big man. And then when we started getting the early practice reports that Pringle kind of stood out more than any big for a minute until Brazil started earning some of that praise, maybe if the season started tomorrow, he'd be the starter at the 5 and Ewan be coming off the bench. So I don't think it matters at this point. I can see a path for all 3 of these guys to average around 25 minutes a game. I'm not saying all 3 will, but I actually can see a path for that now. You've got 2 frontline positions, 4 and 5. That's going to take up 80 minutes per game out of 200. You got 5 starters, right? 5 players on the court at all times. So 200 minutes, 2 of those are frontline, 4 and 5. And between those 3 players, I'd see them potentially taking up 75 of those 80 minutes, potentially. And each one could be around 25 minutes. Someone's going to be technically a leader in that group in minutes, and, someone will be second and third, but it could be very close. I see a pathway for that now. And the other 5 minutes, Carter Knox be some of his minutes at a small ball 4. Just an idea now of how I see that, because now you can pair up any combination of these 3 and it not be awkward. It's not just because Calipari says so. It's not just because we speculated that they could probably play on the court together and it not be awkward. But it's based on what some of the eye test things told us. When we watched the practice on Wednesday, you saw Ewan popping out and hitting threes. This is a dude that took one 3-point attempt in his career coming into this season. That was at Florida State last year. He missed it. He'd played a few games 2 years prior to that at Ole Miss. Never attempted a 3 there, attempted only 1 last season. So it's not exactly a concept that's already kind of baked in on what he's shown at this level prior, but it's something that onlookers before, when I was putting out the source information prior to going into that building last week, being told this guy's stepping out, knocking down threes, looks like a good 3-point shooter. And then we saw it for ourselves. We saw it in contested drill work, getting open shots and shell drill work. But the idea that he can pop, and we already knew that he's got a really good offensive skill set. He can put the ball on the deck. He can take a defensive rebound and let everybody else clear out and bring the ball up the court. He can back down another big or handle the ball and maneuver around them from out on the perimeter, working his way into the paint. He's got a nice mid-range shot, got good touch on that, good footwork and touch around the basket offensively. He can play above the rim and finish. He had over 50 dunks last year, but he's got 3-level versatility, which is something that Trevor Brazil obviously has. We know Trevin can finish above the rim, and we know he can shoot the 3. So you don't have maybe just one big that can shoot threes and make a defense account for them and plan for them based on a multitude of things they can do. And you don't have to just worry about the hard rolls and the interior stuff. When you're looking at these guys, you also have to worry about them popping out and knocking down shots. And so they've become a real threat in more ways than one. Plus, the one thing about Ewan is he's a really good passer for a big man too. So when you try to scramble maybe to cover him and close on him, he'll beat you with a pass for someone cutting offside or wherever it is. He's going to see teammates and hit him with a pass. So I think the versatility of this front line is something now. If you wondered, you got 2 5s and you only have 1 4 in Brazil, I think you've got 2 players. Look at it the other way. not what you don't have, but what you do have. You've got two players that can play the 4 and the 5. I mean, one of the team, one of was it DJ Wagner or Malik Thomas in that press conference? I've already forgot. I think it was DJ. They look at Malik Ewan as a 6'10" wing. Now I'm not sure that you're going to see the three of those players on the court together, but it wouldn't shock me if there was if sometime during the non-conference part of the schedule in a game where Arkansas maybe feels like it's in control, that Calipari trots that out, puts the three of them on the court together just to get a look at it. But I think there's enough versatility in two of those guys. And look, Nick Pringle, they're working on his shot around the basket. He's definitely a guy they want going after offensive rebounds, tip dunks, and putbacks and things like that. We know Trevor Brazile can excel at flying in and getting a putback smash or just getting a tough offensive rebound. We saw more and more of that toughness, that physicality, those kind of rebound plays. We saw them sporadically for the better part of 3 seasons. At the end of the year, it was consistent. But I think the thing that stands out the most about these three, and you don't have to see anything really, just look at them statistically, this is going to be, rebounding is not going to be a problem for this trio. This is a strength. Last year, it was a question mark. You had a gimpy Jonas Adu for most of the season. You had Big Z, who's moved on to Illinois to play with his twin brother, who was not a good rebounder at 7'2". And then you still had Brazile going through growing pains, whatever it was, for most of the season until he wasn't. It's almost like a switch came on. The switch was Adu Thero getting hurt with 4 games to go, in the regular season. And so whatever that switch is, it's been turned on for Brazile. And right now, it looks like there's been no turning back. There's only been progression. So out of the gates, this team, period, no matter what else I just said about what we think could happen based on what we've seen and what been told so far, very early still, if nothing else, if you just put that on the table for now and say, well, we need more evidence of some of this stuff. Okay, fine. They're going to rebound the hell out of the basketball. These are not rookies. They're all veteran players. And Ewan and Pringle are plus offensive rebounders as well. They're really good on the offensive glass. You put that together in combination with what they do defensively, rebounding. They're both really strong rebounders. And then Brazile, the version of Brazile that we saw the last 9 games and what we think that's turning into more of a monster, not less of one coming into this season. The glass work from the 3 on the front line there, it may be as good as we've seen in a long time. And so because of some of the offensive traits of some of these guys, we talk defense. I think Pringle is a guy very versatile. We've said this, and Calipari talked about it, who can switch. And you talk about 2-man game. Well, it's not just how you advantage that on your offensive end, but how do you deal with it defensively? Does you know who Cal? I need more coffee. Someone else does. Eric, does you know who Cal? I don't. I'm not sure what you're asking there, but thank you for the comment. So jumping back into this, Pringle can switch. He can switch in that screen game and competent in keeping and being able to close and keep himself squared and in front of guards. It's not a liability. This is one of the biggest things that was a problem for Arkansas's front line last year. Even when Jonas Adu was healthy, some of the screen game stuff was something that Arkansas struggled with no matter who was out there. And it wasn't just always the bigs. It was, there was some other stuff, but that was part of it. Nick Pringle's a guy that gives you that kind of versatility where he can switch out on a smaller, more perimeter-oriented player, and you're okay there. Trevor Brazile can be a freak defensively because of his ability to get out of his area to block shots, to alter shots. We've seen in the little highlights that came out prior, the day before we were in for the open practice, and then when we were in the open practice, Brazile being very proactive defensively and breaking up plays, whether it's blocking a shot or batting away a pass that someone throws, a lob pass. These are not always things that you saw him do. He's just kind of a guy that wasn't ahead of the curve and, watching things materialize and happen. His athleticism and the instincts with his athleticism has flashed, but just kind of the locked in play to play kind of thing, we haven't seen as much. again, the end of last season was a great start, and now it seems like he's building on it. So it looks like he could be a plus defender as well. I think Pringle can be. I think of the three, Ewan's probably the one with the biggest question marks defensively. But he's got the athleticism. He's 6'10", 6'11". He's got the tools, and but we think that there's maybe more he can do there. He did not seem to be resistant. Maybe as resistant as he could be with his body in that frame, and his IQ. He's got a high floor IQ. When you're as good as he is offensively, that you've got to have a high IQ. And so, how do you implement that on your defensive end? You should be able to. It was something Jalen Williams did really well, because that wasn't the most explosive, quick of foot guy. Sometimes Jalen, kind of heavy legged. But man, he anticipated well. He's really proactive in his defensive movement. It's how he drew a lot of charges and altered players, not their shots, but their paths to the basket, which altered their shots. So Ewan needs to work on that. But I think defensively, overall, I like what I see. I like the versatility offensively. I like the fact that this group is going to give Arkansas major benefit on the glass this time around, where we just didn't really see that last year. Certainly not consistently from the bigs, the fours and the fives. I think that turns around. The shot blocking is a question mark. I think last year's team probably, when you look at it statistically, certainly, and looking at these players individually, ahead of where this group might be. But that doesn't mean it has to continue to be that way this year. Brazil, the more minutes he gets, he's capable of averaging between 1.5 and 2 blocks per game. That's just fine. If it's 2 or more, who saw that coming? But he's capable of it. We'll see. Pringle's a guy I think that can block some shots. I think at a higher rate than he did last year for South Carolina for sure. And then Ewan's a guy, again, he gets off the floor. He's all of these guys can finish well above the rim. They're not under the rim bigs, and you see some ones that are effective. These are above the rim bigs, and they're all 6'10" or taller, each one of them. So there's a thought here that they're athletic, they're tall, they're long. There's no reason why they shouldn't be able to maybe improve where some of their numbers were last year in different ways to get that shot blocking up. And so that's important. But again, I could see a pathway for all three of these guys to be around 25 minutes a game. It's not to say that will, but now that becomes more of a thing of, you don't worry about Ewan and Pringle on the court maybe as much as you thought initially, when you thought, well, we're getting 2 centers. They're not going to be on the court all the time or at the same time much. Maybe they'll be on it more than we realize. And maybe that's, again, the backup depth to Trevor Brazile. All right, the only other thing I want to add is I do think Carter Knox will play some small ball 4. Again, maybe 5 minutes a game, maybe more, depending upon, if Arkansas has any injury situations, illness, foul trouble, and then a combination of 1 or 2 of those things could push a guy like Knox, again, into where you've got two wings on the court, a couple of guards, and just 1 big. We'll see some of that. And then sometimes you want it to be that way based on matchups, personnel situations. You're going to be more than hopefully the goal is you've recruited good enough talent positionally where you don't have a ton of drop off, not from the talent standpoint, not from ability standpoint. Maybe sometimes it's size if you do go small ball, but sometimes you want to go small ball for whatever reason. So I think we'll see some of Knox. And again, the 2 guys they're bringing in that aren't on campus yet, Javic and Elmir Javic and Paulo Samito, 7-footers. I see both of those as, again, development guys, more development. And that doesn't mean we'll never see them. Doesn't mean that, let's say Samito gets on campus and blows everybody away, and now all of a sudden you're like, man, we got to get 6 to 8 minutes per game for that guy. And we need to, that's part of his development. He's good enough for that's not going to hurt us. So we can't rule out something like that. I don't even envision that, though. It's where we're looking at it right now. Until I hear something coming out of the building once he's there, right now I see those as more developmental, long-term. Not that they won't ever see the court, but how much, I don't think it's something that'll be, you could look at it now and say they're planned to have this kind of role this soon. We're just not there yet. I think it's what I described and how that's going to look. I think this could be Arkansas's best front line in years. I think it could be. They've got the pieces for it to be collectively the best front line in years. Last year, you needed a healthy Jonas Adu. throughout the season. You needed Big Z. He did some really good things and had some really big games, shooting the ball, good passer out of the perimeter, could block some shots, but man, he just got chewed up defensively. Wasn't physical, wasn't a good rebounder. Trevor Brazil, I think he had a few little injury problems early in the year in non-conference play. I think he even sat out a game, if I'm not mistaken. But he just, again, he wasn't anything resembling consistently what he did those first 8 games in his first year after transferring Missouri, out in Maui, all that. And then he gets hurt when they get back, and we didn't see him again until the next season. And then he was really up and down. Had the big game against Duke, and then last year, he flashed. He and Adu both played well against Michigan, that neutral site road win. But it wasn't until the end of the year that Brazil really came on. So Arkansas's front line was never clicking on all cylinders for a variety of reasons. Even Big Z was hurt some. This group, if it stays healthy, not only will it exceed what that group did, but I can't think of an Arkansas front line, probably going back to the Nolan years when he brought in Darnell Robinson, Lee Wilson to put on that front line with Dwight Stewart and Corliss Williamson, in the conversation for GOAT at Arkansas player-wise. It's Moncrief for me, but Corliss is right there. But that's probably as effective a front line with depth as I've seen at Arkansas. There's been other good ones and other great big men and other front lines in a group that you could point to and say they were really good too. Why aren't you talking about them? I just kind of highlighted one that went to 2 championship games and went 1-1 in those, in those situations. So this is the kind of front line that could be talked about in maybe a similar vein. It's too soon to say for sure that it'll play out that way, but I see it as a possibility, a real possibility. I didn't even say that about the front line last year before we knew about injuries and all that. This one, because of all the veterans, they're all older guys, they're all athletic, they're all big, and now we saw more skill than we thought maybe from Ewan in terms of 3-point shooting. And now you've got 2 bigs that can knock down threes. Now it's got to be proven in games. He's only taken 1 3-point attempt in his career. So, but it's just, we're talking based on what we've seen so far and what it maybe could be. And so I make bold statements like that. All right, 42 minutes in, I've started to make these a little longer lately. We're going to curtail that in the next few days. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. If you've done it already, please hit subscribe, like, and share. We appreciate all of you being here. If something important breaks today, something like a commitment or something else that's really important, we'll try to find a way to come back on live. Busy day, long day. But until next time, if not, it'll probably be tomorrow. Until then, be good, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.